You can start, Anne.
Start now. Welcome to the Global Mental Health Peer Network. And we're going to be doing a webinar today on refugees and future generations and mental health. And today we have three women who happen to be Kurdish from northern Iraq. And I'll introduce the three of them, and then we'll go over a little bit what a refugee is, and we're going to go over questions. So the first guest today will be Ashna Khoshnaw, who came to the United States when she was about 3 years old with her immediate family. She started out in Guam and then got placed to Oregon. She went to school for dental assisting and worked in the orthodontic specialty for 2 years and decided to take a break after she had her second baby. Ashna now works remote in the trucking industry as a dispatcher. She has 2 children with her husband, who she was able to bring over to the United States in 2015 from Kurdistan, northern Iraq, when they got married. She has lived in Oregon during her whole time in the United States. Hawer Kadir is a Kurdish American woman living in Portland, Oregon. She moved from Erbil, northern Iraq, at the age of 6 and has spent the majority of her life in Oregon, where she now practices as a mental health therapist. In her spare time, you can find her connecting with family and friends, preparing delicious Kurdish dishes, and creating wonderful memories. Shanaz Ahmed is a first-generation Kurdish American optometry student who is passionate about serving her community in Portland and beyond. As the daughter of Kurdish asylees and immigrants, Shanaz brings a unique perspective to the conversation about Kurdistan and refugee issues. So just quickly, what is a refugee? According to Amnesty International, a refugee is a person who has fled their own country because they are at risk of serious harm, rights violations, and persecution there. The risks to their safety and life were so great that they felt they had no choice but to leave and seek safety outside of their country because of their own government cannot or will not protect them from dangers. Refugees have a right to international protection. And what is an asylum seeker? So actually, some of the parents of the Kurdish young women here who came over were asylees, actually. So an asylum seeker is a person who has left their country and is seeking protection from persecution and serious human rights violations in another country, but who hasn't been yet legally recognized as a refugee and is waiting to receive decision in their asylum case. Seeking asylum is a human right. That means everybody should be allowed to enter another country and seek asylum. And immigrants, refugees, and asylees come in with different immigration statuses in each country. But today, we're actually going to be going into mental health and the journey that these three women went through to get here. So to start off, let's talk about how you made it to the United States. Ashna, we'll start with Ashna, then Hawer, then Shanaz. How did you come to the United States? Can you talk about that journey?
From what I remember, we got flown to Guam. I don't remember where. I think we were in Duhok, which is another city in Kurdistan. And we were in hotels for a couple days or a week or so until my parents, I guess, got the call. And that's where almost all the refugees or asylees were, until they got the call that the plane was ready for them. And then we got put in Guam. And I don't remember how long we stayed there. I think it was months. And then I don't remember much just because I was really young. And then I just remember, well, I don't remember, but I know we came to Oregon and that's where we've been since then, since 97, I believe it was, 96.
96, right. So just to give some context, the women here have families who have been refugees at least twice. In 1991, they fled from northern Iraq down to southern Iraq, Iran, and other areas because they were in danger. And in 1996, many of their parents were working for the United States government. And one of the CIA officers said, "We're going to fight with you in Kurdistan, and you go ahead and uprise against Saddam Hussein," which was a lie. And it was amazing that the United States took responsibility for that and airlifted 5,000 people out of Iraq quickly before they could be killed instantly. And the only place they had to put them was Guam, because they had empty army barracks there. So Ashna was one of the children with her parents who were airlifted quickly out of Iraq, out of Kurdistan, northern Iraq, to Guam, and where they stayed for a while. There is actually on choiceheals.com, I have put all the references for this webinar on that choiceheals.com under the refugee web little tab. You can actually see a short video from the Associated Press of the people in Guam, and as they were being processed right off the airplanes into Guam and also the living quarters. So let's go on to Hawer. How did you come to the United States?
So good morning, everyone. Well, good morning from Portland, Oregon. So similarly to Ashna's background and situation, my dad was actually also involved in working for the US government at that time and was in a similar organization as Ashna's dad, and was one of the people who were kind of, offered, right, to leave Iraq due to the politics and the situations and the dangers to their lives there. And so, yeah, in 1996, he left Iraq and also went to Guam. Unfortunately, my mom, my two siblings, and I did not go with them. I think at that time, I don't know what factors exactly went into that separation and us not being able to join initially with my father in 1996. But yeah, we got separated. And so my dad came to Guam, and later they were placed in Portland, Oregon. And my mom, my siblings, and I stayed in Kurdistan, Iraq for a couple of years. And then in 1998 and around, June, July, we, at that point, we were a reunification case. So my dad was doing all the things he needed to do here to get the family reunified. And so we were having to go through lots of documentation process and all these things. And we ended up being in Turkey for about a month. And I think there were a lot of complications there too, just because I think, with being Kurdish and being also in a country that, has a lot of history with the Kurds, I think there were some things happening there. And yeah, we stayed there for about 22 days. And then in 1998, in August, I believe it was, we were flown into the US and then to Portland, Oregon, where we were unified. And interestingly, Ashna's dad and my dad are childhood friends. And so they grew up together, and it's just kind of an interesting dynamic and story there. Yeah.
And Shanaz, how did you come?
Well, yeah. So I was born here, but my parents also immigrated from northern Iraq in '96, and they actually also went to Guam, and they were there for a few months as well. And then they came to the US, and they didn't initially come to Oregon. They went to New Jersey, I think Newark or New Jersey, somewhere over there in the east side. And they lived there for a little bit, and they found out that there were Kurdish people here in Portland, Oregon, and that's actually what what kind of inspired them to move here. Was they didn't have a community over there, so they wanted to have that kind of sense of community, and also people they knew, because over there they didn't know anyone. So that's kind of what brought them to Portland in particular.
Wow, so 3 different stories of very, very interesting. However, And Ashna and Shanaz, do you want to talk about maybe during that journey, during that time, even in Turkey and other places, how did it feel to be a child, and what helped you? What would have helped you get through that better? And I know, Ashna, you were saying about the toys, and in the video, it talks about actually people bringing in toys from the United States to Guam for these children. Can you talk about, did that help out?
Yeah, I mean, we still had a sense of being a child and keeping like a childhood. It might have even kind of been better than what we had in Kurdistan, because they were just providing like so many joys as kids that we thought were joys, like endless soda. My mom was saying like there was so much soda, people would just drink soda instead of water. And the kids, they always had toys. They would bring boxes and boxes of toys, and it was like they had like little programs where the kids would go kind of like school, and they would just like learn. And there's a video that also shows that. Thank you. And sorry. And sorry, I lost my train of thought, but it was,
Fine.
I mean, we still kept a sense of being a child, and it was like, it felt, from what I recall, from what I remember from videos and pictures I've seen, it was a good time. I mean, my parents, I'm sure they were going through a way different thing mentally than as kids we were, but that was like what I remember. I have this thought, and I don't know if it's like true or if it's a dream or I just made it up, but I'm like, I remember there being so many, I think coconut trees or banana trees or one of those. And I remember climbing one of the trees to get it. And I don't know if that's like made up, because I'm like, those trees are probably really big. but it just like, it wasn't a scary place as like it might seem for some people. It was like a happy place from what I have memories of.
Sounds like the programming worked for you to make sure, because your parents were in shock. They never thought they were going to leave northern Iraq, Kurdistan ever. Some of them didn't speak English at all. And so that's great to hear that. Hawer,
to somewhere where they don't know the language, or like America is such a big name, a big country. It was, I'm sure it was pure shock for them. But as kids, we were just given all the good stuff, so we didn't really realize what was going on.
How about you, Hawer? Your experiences and also in Turkey, memories.
Yeah. Again, now a lot of these memories are pretty faint. And from what I can recall, I feel like what helped be in Turkey and get through that experience was just the hope of like seeing my dad again. And then also the comfort of being with my mom and my siblings. And it's funny because this really distinct memory I have in Turkey is that my siblings and I, all three of us, got chicken pox. And so we're in this place, we're in this like neighborhood that's not the greatest. We don't know the language. We're like relying on people to really relay messages and take care of things that we need to take care of. And then, you get chicken pox, and that was really, really hard. And it's interesting that memory always sticks out for me. But yeah, I think it was, from what I can recall, it just felt like a waiting game. It was like this temporary place. You knew you were leaving soon, you didn't know when, and it was just kind of like going with the flow. At that age, you're kind of just doing what the adults say, right? And then also filling in the downtime with whatever childlike things that were available, right? Playing outside and watching TV. And I remember watching like Turkish soap operas and not understanding a word, but like that's what was on TV and it was something to do. So yeah, that's all the memories that's kind of all I can recall from that experience. And then I remember when we flew into Portland and, just seeing my dad and all the joy that was there. And, as a kid, you don't really care where you are, and just as long as you're with your family. And I think that's the feeling I had in that moment when I arrived in Portland, in Oregon. And then there was a lot that came after that. And so I'll wait to share that until you have more specific questions. But then you're kind of like, here's your new home and you're thrown into this new culture, and now you're going to go to school here, and then you show up in class and you have no idea what anybody's saying, and then there's all that, right? The culture shock and everything else.
Why don't you go ahead and how that was for you, and then we'll go to Shanaz after that with her question.
Yeah, I think, it's like Ashna was saying a little bit, it's, if I were to kind of label the different milestones of my life growing up here, I would say that like initial period of elementary school was like this extended, almost like honeymoon phase, right? You're this young child in a new place, and there's so many new things, and it's fun in a lot of ways. There's a lot to explore, and you're meeting new people, and you're getting all this, I wouldn't say attention, but like support in different ways. But it was also confusing, right? You're like, where am I? What's happening? What are people saying in my class? What are the teachers saying? Luckily, at the elementary school that I was at, there were a couple other Kurdish kids in my class. And I think, that placement was purposeful to support me. And I believe, from what I recall, there was also a Kurdish interpreter in the school that supported with some of the language barriers and getting established in like ELL, or ESL at that time, English second language or something like that. So it was like a lot of mixed emotions, but I think as a kid too, you don't fully understand the extent of why am I here? And why did I leave that other place that was my home? And so I think that's how I would describe that period.
And so I'll go to Shanaz and we'll come back to Ashna. Okay, Shanaz, what were some struggles you faced as a first generation immigrant in a grade school, and how did you overcome them?
Okay. Well, first off, I just want to make a comment on that previous question. Even though I didn't go to Guam and I didn't like travel with my parents, I just remember my parents saying that their families were really worried about them. They actually thought that my family would like my brother and then my mom and dad were eaten by like alligators, just because they didn't have any access to communication. Like back then they wrote letters to each other, and they didn't have like phones. Like I don't think it was that accessible. And so they had seen on the news that, oh, in America there are alligators, and I guess there was like alligators had eaten some people or something like that. And so they just saw it on TV, and like from that they thought that my family were one of those people. And so they actually thought that my parents and like my family were dead for like, I think 3 months or so. And when they actually like talked to each other on the phone for the first time, it was like it was very hard for them, because like they were like, is this real? Are you real? Like they were like, they couldn't believe that my parents were alive. So I'm like, that alone is very traumatic and very sad, just because they like actually thought that they weren't here anymore. But I guess it was also relieving to find out that they were safe and they had arrived at their destination without any troubles like that. So that's one big thing that I learned from my parents and was really shocked to hear. And then for that question, some struggles I faced as a child in grade school, I think similar to Howard, even though like I said, even though I was born here, I still also felt like I didn't belong. Being like speaking Kurdish primarily at home, growing up, I didn't really speak English that much. Like my parents were always like, no, you're going to speak Kurdish at home. Like you're Kurdish, you can't forget that. Like, and I was always really upset by that, because my English wasn't good. So I was like, at home, I can practice that. And they're always against that. So I think just like not having the best English growing up was like one of the struggles for me. And then also just being like one of the only Kurdish kids in school. So I went to Markham as well. but I don't really remember that much. And then we moved to a different school where I didn't have that many Kurdish peers. I didn't have any actually. I can't really remember. So but yeah, just those were some struggles, was just feeling kind of like out of place and not belonging. I mean, eventually you meet friends and you kind of overcome that, but I think initially it's hard, and those are some real struggles.
Wow. Yeah. Ashna, how about you? Any comments about the grade school experience and what would have helped you?
I mean, it felt at some points it did feel like a sense of community because there were in Markham Elementary, which is where most of us went. There was lots of Kurdish kids, and so it didn't feel as scary, but it did feel scary, like not knowing the language very much. And just like Shanaz said, my dad also only let us speak Kurdish at home. I think like sneakily, my siblings and I in the bedroom, we'd be speaking English, but it was like mainly Kurdish, which is I'm thankful for now, especially after having my own kids, like trying to instill that language and keep that alive. But in school, there's just one thing I remember, I think it was like third grade or so, or second, I don't remember, but it was Eid. And usually Eid, we would do henna it would be on our fingertips.
Oh, can you just say quickly what Eid is for people who may not know? It's a holiday, right? So
yeah, it's a Muslim holiday. All Muslims usually celebrate, and it's just there's 2 Eids throughout the year. The first one is after 30 days of Ramadan, which is fasting. You have a 3-day celebration where you see family, friends, and just like celebrate everything. And then also, I believe it's 2 months and 10 days after that Eid, there's another Eid, which has a different meaning, but it's still religious, and it's still, the main thing is like seeing family and eating good food and just celebrating and being together, and also making lots of charity too. And usually we would do henna. It's like a way to celebrate and like get ready for Eid. And I remember I had it on my fingertips, and I remember, I believe 2nd or 3rd grade, there was a little boy that was like, oh my gosh, you have blood on your fingers. Oh my gosh. Like he made it such a big deal. And I mean, ever since then, I've never really worn henna on my fingers anymore, but it's just like kids back in that time didn't have any cultural awareness of any other cultures usually. And it was just lack of education, I would assume. But I mean, those are like, I only have very few memories that I recall from elementary school, and it's one of the main ones. And then, yeah, I just remember walking the halls, and like you'd see a Kurdish student, which like we all knew each other because we were together most of the time. But sorry, that's my child banging on the door.
Yeah. And I just wanted, yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Hawer. Yeah.
I wanted to add that it's because, you know, Shanaz was saying like, I didn't have Kurdish peers and there weren't other Kurdish kids in my classes. And then Asha and I had a different experience, and we're like, yeah, we had some peers. And I mean, that was, I think, due to luck, right? It was the same age group. And then for Ashna and I's case, our families knew each other previous to living here. So there was that automatic sense of like, we're family now. So I think that's just one way that the experience can be so different, right? That we had people that we felt connected to from our community. And then there were others who were kind of like, where are my Kurdish people at? I'm the only one in this class, or I'm not aware of the other people in the community. And that's where that like lack of connection is, right? That disconnection. And, you know, that it took time for all of us to be connected in the community and to even have a sense of a Kurdish community here. So we were kind of like, I would say, on our own for a little bit there.
Mm-hmm. And I feel also because in Guam, almost like all the Kurdish, the Kurdish people were all there, and that's how they all met. Like my family knew Hawer's dad and some other parents, but that's when they really got close and then met other families. And then when they all got placed in Portland, Oregon, most of them were even in the same apartment complexes. So it just like, there was a lot of sense of community, I feel like, for our parents at that time. And the kids, I mean, we just met other kids and would be playing. So I think that also helped a lot, is like being with them in Guam with the other Kurdish families, and then being all placed in Portland, Oregon, and then also most of us being placed in the same like apartment complex or same neighborhood areas, and then seeing each other in school. Like it just step by step, I feel like all the connections got closer. And I mean, most of us now to this day are still pretty good friends, and like that's how it all started.
Great. And actually, I was working in refugee resettlement, and I was the one that found the apartment complex, the first
Oh
ones,
wow.
families together. And honestly, before you came to the United States, I was working at the Refugee Resettlement Agency, which how people get into the United States is that through the United Nations, or especially like yours, through a different way through United States government. We would get these dossiers, we would get these files, and like, you're going to find food, housing, and clothing for all these people. And we did. And in our office, none of us knew what Kurdish was. There are 40 million Kurds in the world without their own country yet. And I had also finished a Bachelor of International Studies, the economic track, and I had never heard of Kurds. And I felt so, so embarrassed. A lot of us in the office scrambled to get books. There were no films about you. There was nothing about the Kurds. We had to quickly learn about it. And so thank you to your parents and to you for teaching us what Kurds are. But that was really a difficulty for us to know how to welcome you together when we couldn't even find things about your culture. And it was also before the internet. So also, can you talk about like being Kurdish in the school system that didn't know about you either? And how was that for your mental health? Anyone want to comment on that?
I can kind of comment on that. Growing up, I wouldn't say I'm from Kurdistan just because it wasn't a country. And so I'd always be like, I'm from northern Iraq. So people would be like, oh, you're Iraqi, you're Arab, like, and I'd be like, no, I'm Kurdish. And they still would have no idea what that is. So I kind of gave up on explaining that, honestly, and just kept saying I'm from northern Iraq and just can't let people make their own assumptions about it. But then in college, there were like undergrad, I went to Portland State, so there were a lot of other Kurdish people there, and a lot of people knew what Kurdistan was. And by that time, it was like the Peshmergas and the freedom fighters, and a lot of people were aware of what Kurds were and where they were located. And so I felt more comfortable just like identifying as a Kurdish person. It's not that I don't want to identify as a Kurdish person, but it's more like taking that step of explaining and educating others was sometimes a bit too much. And sometimes people like they wouldn't like necessarily acknowledge, like, I don't know, there are different types of people in the world. And so I just kind of like picked and choose who I'd explain where I'm from. But yeah, it was just difficult. Just like you said, it's like there wasn't any information out there about Kurdistan. So that was just really challenging to kind of have to explain it as a child of like, it's this region and like all of that. So yeah, it was, I'd say
this, right? It's really there. I'm not making this up.
yeah,
And,
exactly. It's like
and
there was
how
a globe in the classroom and they're like, okay, point to your country. And it's like,
Yes.
oh shoot.
It's always
I
the
don't
worst feeling.
yeah,
really
exactly.
talk about that. And how is that for your identity?
I mean, it was kind of embarrassing, like, and I hate to say that, but it's like I'd always like Shanaz, I had the same exact experience. Like class introductions, they'd be like, "Where are you from? How old are you? What's your name?" And I'd always say, "I'm from Kurdistan, North Iraq," and they'd be like, "Where's that? What's that?" And then, the North Iraq they would know, but Kurdistan they'd be like, "What's that?" And then, or a lot of times if kids were trying to be mean, they'd be like, "Show me on a map," and it's like,
Yes.
can't. So it was a struggle, and like I said, sometimes embarrassing, and like, and then I would, there's only so much you can say or fight back with words.
Hawer, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, a very similar experience. You are between like excited to talk about where you're from and educate people and say, Kurdistan is there and I'm real and it's a real place. And then there are times where it was exhausting and you're like, oh man, like I'm a 12-year-old kid and I have to have this discussion with kids my age and grown-ups. And it's just like, it would be very exhausting sometimes. And similar to both these girls, sometimes just to kind of keep conversations limited and kind of preserve my own energy, I would just kind of make it short and sweet, Northern Iraq. And then you get a lot of, oh, okay. And, people kind of place you in this like in between of, you're not Arab and you're not Persian. So you're somewhere in between there. And you're like, this time I'm going to let you have it. Yes.
You give up at some point.
Yeah, and then there's just so much. I think sometimes there was a lot of expectations to teach and to help others learn, and that's okay. And also, it was tiring, and then you have your name, and your name is a whole other thing, and you're spending every class teaching others how to say your name, and that was a whole nother thing. And then your accent or the way you say a certain word, or you don't understand certain words in the language. So I think just all of it together was hard. And so I think at some point you just start to really try hard to blend in and fit in. And that is problematic in itself, because then you start to question so much about yourself and your identity, and where do I fit in this world? Am I Kurdish enough? Am I American enough? And how do you kind of find this balance in your identity? So that is that starts early on. And I feel like most 10-year-olds probably aren't thinking about, they are in a lot of ways, but when it comes to the cultural identity, I think it's different when you are a refugee, or you are a first generation person growing up here.
And you happen to be also here during the time of 9/11, and you're coming from Muslim families. And how was it for you and your family during 9/11? Explain about that.
Sorry to interrupt. I think I was in 4th grade at that time. 4th or 5th. And I just remember hearing about it in class at Markham Elementary, and it was such a scary thing, and kids were freaking out because I think one of the kids, their parents were in New York or something, and it was just such a scary time. And I personally don't look too Middle Eastern, which I didn't choose that, but I wouldn't get too much hatred from people that didn't know me, because I didn't look Middle Eastern on the outside. But my parents, I'm sure they dealt with a lot of stuff. My dad worked at a gas station at that time, and I know he would get remarks day to day. My mom, she used to wear the headscarf, and after 9/11 she took it off because she didn't feel safe to show that she's Muslim or show that she's Middle Eastern. And that was just one of our experiences as our family had.
Hawer, did you want to say something too?
Similar to Ashna, I remember being in school and we had a lockdown, and we were all what's going on? And I believe we got sent home early that day as well. The country was in shock, and it was a really scary time. And then what followed was even scarier, right? Because, there, as Ashna was saying, she says, I don't present as Middle Eastern. And I think we call that passing, right? I'm losing the words here, but she passes off as maybe Caucasian or white. And there's other people who, maybe look a little bit more Middle Eastern, or they wear the headscarf, and then you're kind of put in this category of you're Muslim, and that association with what happened. So I just, some of the big memories I have is the community coming together, and some of the older Kurdish girls who would cover their hair, they stopped wearing the hijab just for safety. And a lot of the women, I think, just kind of reduced how often they went out, or if they did, it was kind of more in pairs or with, their husbands or someone like that. So there was that. And I think not in elementary school, but probably middle school and high school, there was a lot of like racist jokes about, is Osama bin Laden your uncle, or, just really like terrible jokes associated with 9/11, and the assumption that you're connected to that somehow, and, just really stereotypical things, comments and microaggressions, and then just like flat out racist comments and jokes. So there was a lot of that, and it was a difficult time. And I think, we've talked about this before too, and there were, male Kurdish men in our community who were physically assaulted and, followed and threatened. So it was a really scary time.
The irony is that the Kurdish were fighting for the United States. and that's one reason why your parents are here, because they were supporting the United States and what they're doing. So almost opposite. And talk about being a teenager, and also what would have helped out, like mental health wise. What could have schools or other people do, or mental health professionals do to help you find your identities, and talk about that struggle with the identity?
Access and education first and foremost. I mean, I don't think I had any introduction to the world of mental health or psychology until like probably the last year of high school. And then I was doing an intro to psych class, and I was learning so much. And then, naturally you have conversations about mental health, and that there are these people called counselors and licensed therapists, and this is the type of work they do. And you're like, wait, what? And I think that would have been really helpful to be connected, right? For people to think about, these kids are growing up in this dual culture almost, right? That they're a part of something when they're outside of the home, and then they're a part of something else when they go home, and that kind of follows them everywhere. How can they be supported? How can we create a space to talk about these things? Because I feel like I personally didn't have a lot of people I could talk to about that, without judgment, that I was being, too Americanized, and I'm forgetting who I am. And then with, my other friends, it was like, I wasn't necessarily American enough for them. And so I felt like no one to talk to about it. And then I think just as a community, we didn't talk about mental health a lot. So it was like, where do you even start? So that was really hard.
I mean, I feel like now, the past couple of years, our generation is slowly talking about mental health, whereas before it was, we knew about it. I feel like we just didn't really speak on it, or just chose to ignore it for the most part. But I feel like as life goes on, the older you get, the more you find how important it is to talk about it. And like, we all have, for the most part, similar experiences and traumas and all that stuff. And it was just, I feel like there was no education when we were growing up about it. And from our parents, even our parents, I feel like now they're like really thinking about mental health, whereas they're all 50 and over, and now that they're thinking about mental health, it's still like a big step for them, whereas before it was, to them, it's definitely not non-existent. And to people back home in Kurdistan, it's like mental health is just, I don't know, they'd rather call you crazy than think there's something mentally going on. And, rather than fix the issue, they feel like it's not fixable, or can't really talk it out.
Right. Well, I think you're like touching on that piece of like stigma, and it's a taboo, this is a taboo topic. And I think even here, as a state in Oregon and as a country, like we've shifted a lot when it comes to this topic of mental health, and hopefully going towards a direction where it's okay to talk about it, and it happens to all of us. You were using words like anxiety and trauma. And what's interesting is, I feel like our parents didn't even have that like emotional vocabulary. Like they couldn't even label that this is trauma or this is anxiety, because again, of that one, lack of education about it. And two, I think, being in survivor mode for so long and prioritizing other things, right? Get my family to safety, establish in a new culture, get the financial stuff situated and get the financial needs met. I mean, like all of that was at the forefront, and mental health was this thing that was sitting like in the attic, if we're thinking of a house, or the basement, right? We don't have time for that right now.
It was survival mode for our parents, especially for our dads. I feel like moms were taking care of the kids at home, whereas dads were working sometimes 2 jobs because they were still trying to support their family and siblings and parents that were still left behind in Kurdistan. So mental health, I'm sure, was the last thing on their minds. And like you said, they didn't even have the vocabulary they probably didn't even know what anxiety was, or like the feeling that they had, what it was. Like they just probably, I don't know, they probably thought that's just what you feel like when you're working 2 jobs and super stressed out and trying to take care of family here and back home. And like, I can't imagine.
Right. So your parents, Shanaz, I'm going to have you, chime in if you'd like to too, but just about the traumas, and also traumas of being Kurdish and then under attack for so many years from so many different places. There is long-standing trauma over generations, and we call the epigenetics that stays in your DNA until you work it out. So just thinking about that deep trauma. Shanaz, would you like to comment on this as well?
Yeah, I mean, like in terms of I mean, I can relate. Like my parents also had to experience all those things, and in terms of mental health, they didn't really address any of it. But I must add that, like in the US, I appreciate the healthcare system, even with all its flaws. If they were to, like my mom, for example, she would see like a mental health therapist, and there was like a Kurdish interpreter, and that helped her a lot, even though like she still had her like anxiety and like depression. It still helped her, like even if it's a little bit of help, it's something. And addressing those internal internal things is important. And so I think that's the one thing I really appreciate about it here. And then personally, I think that I learned to like address those things from going to school and like identifying those things. I was able to identify, oh, like I have anxiety or I have this. And so I was able to like seek help as well. And so I really appreciate that in the US that I do have that access to like therapy. And although they're not Kurdish therapists, there was like a Muslim therapist, so she was able to relate to some of the things that I also was going through. So I really appreciated that. So just like, I guess how, your question, I kind of forgot it, but I'm just trying to address it.
Great. Yeah, you're doing great. It was just bringing up the topic as well. And if the Kurdish were going to make their own psychology, their own mental health systems, what would they start with? And Hawer, because you're now a therapist, and all of you went to the medical field, which is very interesting. So we talk about maybe why you went to medical, but Hawer, can you talk about how would you make a Kurdish system of healing? What were some things you would do?
Wow. That's a big one. Yeah. Where do you
I have an idea.
start?
I'll have an idea too. I think if you're going to create a mental health system for Kurdish people, and the Kurdish people I've known for over 30 years now, it'd start with community. It would be a community thing and not individual. And if you do individual, then have everything connected to a healthy community. That's one thought. What do you think, Hawer, going from there?
I think, community is definitely important. One, for the connection piece, to also say, hey, there are other people who are experiencing and feeling what you're feeling too. So there's some of that normalization and validation from people in your community, and not a mental health therapist, right? Which I think, there's a lot of challenges with that in terms of like trust and things like that. So yeah, that's a great starting point. This is a question I do think a lot about, and I don't have the perfect answer, truthfully, but the lack of services in the community is why I went down, kind of went this way, this path into this career. And I'm, a newer therapist in the field, and right now I'm not doing specific work related to trauma or families who are similar to mine. I work with children and families in kind of different situations and circumstances. But yeah, you're going to have to come back to me because.
Sure.
I have something to add. When I went to Portland State, they had it was more for the Arabic community there. It was like the Arabic group that hosted it, but they had like a mental health event where they had 4 or 5 guest speakers, and they were touching on mental health, and a lot of us students attended, and I feel like some students brought their parents, so they thought that was really helpful, is reaching out to maybe the younger generation, and then having them bring their families in and just talking about it, presenting about it, and making it kind of normalizing it, because I still think at this point some of the people in the community are hesitant about seeking help, mental help. So I think just having more events, and then I noticed at the end of each presentation, each presenter would put their information, so if people wanted to reach out, they could. So I thought that was really, really helpful. And then one thing I would say though, for me, when I was seeking help, it was actually really hard. So I appreciate Howard for going into the field and being somebody that will be able to provide care for those of us in the community, just because it was a challenge to find somebody I could trust and that I felt could identify with my background somewhat. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to add.
I think
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback off of you talking about those events, right? That the speakers and the people that were at those events were people who were identifying with that community. They were kind of in the community. And so sometimes naturally, maybe there's more willingness to listen, more trust, that this isn't just a issue that the Western, these aren't just issues that people deal with in the Western world. This is universal. Mental health affects all of us. And we're hearing it from someone that is like us, and that could probably digest the information, right? That in a way that makes more sense, or you're not using all the very formal clinical language. I think that's so important, is communicating in a way that people understand and can grasp that. So I just wanted to add that bit. Sorry, Ashna, I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I feel like the more Middle Eastern, or especially Kurdish people who go into the mental health field, I feel like being able to find a psychologist or a therapist to speak to, I feel like would be so beneficial, because we have different cultural norms than let's say Americans, where we can't just up and move out if we're not feeling happy at home. It's not something that's kind of the norm for us until we get married, or it's not just sometimes setting boundaries is not the norm. It's definitely good to set boundaries, but you know what I mean? There's different norms for us that wouldn't be norms for, let's say, someone else that is in our community that's not Kurdish. So that's just what I was gonna say.
Right, for women and men also.
Yeah,
Can you talk about that, the different genders things?
Oh, I can go on and on. I feel like growing up just Kurdish, and our boys are just treated differently, in a sense that they get more leeway to kind of do whatever they want and not have as much precaution or lashback from even the community besides our parents. Whereas like girls, I mean, now it's kind of an even playing field. But when we were growing up, I feel like there was such a drastic difference in how much guys were able to do. And it's not even doing bad things. It's just like hanging out with friends outside of school, or, going somewhere and being out a little late. Like it wasn't kind of allowed for us girls. I mean, for me, especially, at least,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm sure Shanaz and Hawer also grew up the same way I did, where the guys kind of got to do whatever they want and the girls were, had more rules and strictness.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, there are very traditional roles for males and females in the home, right? It's like this hierarchy of, you've got the male, who's usually dad, and then, mom, maybe sometimes it's even the older brother, right, that comes before mom. And so that's what I mean in the sense of very traditional, and when I talk about this, I don't want to say that every Kurdish household functions this way. I always want to be very careful, because I think people who might hear this and say, well, that's not my case. And so it is different. But I think in my experience and what's common is that there are traditional roles for males and females. And I think that's really hard, because for females, right, for our moms who are moving to this new country, they're primarily in the home, they're doing the child rearing and, the homemaking and all that. And so the opportunity to get education or to learn skills, like job skills that they can apply in the real world, right? If they wanted to do that, that is complicated a little bit. And then I think just the theme that typically happens with, how you're raising the children, right? The female versus the male. There's this sense of, we need to protect the girl, right? But there's more on the line with a female, and there's more protecting. And that has a lot to do also with reputation. And that's a very big thing in our community. That, we live in a collectivist culture. So it's not just me and my family, it's me and my family and everyone else and what they think of us and how they perceive us. So there's a lot of pressure to be perfect and to not screw up. And that is a whole subtopic on its own that we can talk about forever. And then the male is more, there's more, I guess you could say, leniency, or there's just more of this like idea that it's males can, what is the word? They get to explore, they're exploring the world and they're learning, and they do that by being out there, and there's less of a protective factor. And so I think there's a lot of that going on.
Shanaz, did you have something to add to that?
And I feel like you both touched on it really well. It's the stereotypical, it's not like how I said, it's not all families that kind of function this way, but for the most part. And I must say that I feel like I know a lot of like I'm a single like girl, and like one day I hope to get married, right? But it's hard because knowing that a lot of the guys out there have been raised to be like, oh, they kind of do whatever they want, or like they may not have as many responsibilities, and like they kind of expect their wife to be like be at home and take care of the family and stuff like that. And I respect everybody's opinion, but like I personally am not looking to play that role 100%. Like I obviously will play that role to some extent, but I also want to I've pursued higher education, so I want to work a little and all these things. And it's like, I think now it's more like normalized, but like I think that in Kurdistan, especially like in my my family in Kurdistan, like extended family, they have the older mindset. Like they don't have that like Western, I feel like it's a Western mindset of like, oh, the girl, like the mother can work a little if she'd like, or like she can go out and stuff like that. It's like, it's not the normal. And so I feel like that's been a challenge for me, is like I didn't pay much attention to it, but now I'm kind of realizing like, oh wait, like these are some expectations within the community, that within the culture, that I might have to like, oh, I hope I don't have to fill those shoes and like to actually play that role of what they expect. But
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going on a tangent now, but I think I got my point across.
Oh, good.
Well,
So,
even with your
yeah.
point, Shauna, sorry to
Mhm.
interrupt.
Go ahead.
Like, I feel like as the years go on or as the days go on, even back home, they're getting more progressive with the way they think and the way the women are. And there's a lot of women I personally know back home where like they're lawyers and they're, you know, in the medical field, and they are working with the men. Like they're not at home, which I know majority are at home. Like I know, and on the other hand, I know a lot of family members who females got college degrees and then they're at home because either there's no work, or maybe they don't want to work, or you know, they just don't feel the need to. Whereas here we pursue higher education to be able to work and to be able to, you know, have like a good career that we can live off. So I feel like it's a mix up, you know. There are some traditional thinkers here and back home, and vice versa, and some
Thank you.
that are
So, yeah,
full-time.
actually, we only have a couple minutes left, believe it or not. And
Oh.
Oh, wow.
I know, can you believe it? It's gone so
There's
fast.
so much more to say.
Well, maybe we'll do
Well,
another one someday. And I think we did have a question from the audience about what are some culturally sensitive approaches that mental health professionals can adopt when working with refugee populations. And listening to you here, it's about understanding collectivist thinking, understanding different gender roles, understanding that the children may be going through different things than the adults, and how to support adults who are coming to a new country trying to give the best to their children, at the same time going through a lot of stress and being in a country they never expected to be in. And maybe the children are more resilient and adaptive to that because they didn't know they're going to do it and open to it because they're growing up. And as we're winding down, could each of you just tell us whatever you want to say at the end of this hour? And thank you so much for all your wisdom and all your beautiful things that you said so far. So we'll start with the youngest and go up to, I don't know who's the oldest, but Shanaz, then Ashna, then Hawer. Okay, Shanaz, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to thank you for having me and allowing me to share my experiences, and to leave it, like mental health is a big topic, and so I hope that I contributed in a positive way in my experience. I hope others can relate to my experiences and just know that they're not alone, and you'll get through it. So yeah.
Great. Ashna?
I'm the oldest, but it's okay. I'll take this title, Camilla. I mean, we're only a few months apart, but first of all, I want to thank you, Anne, and Zach, for putting on this platform for us to speak. And I really appreciate all the work Anne has done within the Kurdish community and still does from time to time assist. And yeah, I mean, just spreading the word about mental health and cultural within that, I feel like it's so important. And the more we speak on it and share our experiences, the more people can maybe get some help through it and some thoughts going about how they feel about that life event that they've been through that's maybe similar to what we've been through.
Okay, and Hawer?
Yeah, yes. Thank you for creating this space to talk about all of these important topics, and for allowing us to share our stories and our experiences. In terms of just navigating mental health and being like culturally competent, I think, you know, doing the work yourself, right? Outside of those one-on-one sessions or that direct care of, you know, educating yourself, learning what you can. And then that second piece of like not assuming, right, that everyone's story is the same or everybody's experience is the same. So being open to asking and also listening and learning, and just creating that, you know, that safe space to talk about it, to have back and forth conversations and discussions, and a lot can really unravel as you're talking and doing the work in that sense and processing.
Thank you very much. And there are references to this to actually academic works on refugee resettlement and refugees, the Kurdish refugees, on choiceheals.com, www.choiceheals.com. You can see there's actually films coming out about Kurdish refugees, and I've listed 5 films you can find on YouTube, and one new film out of Japan about a Kurdish refugee in Japan, and you can look that up. And so again, Choice Heals, www.choiceheals.com. And I'm Ann Kasper with the Global Mental Health Peer Network. And thank you to Zach Mata for helping us with today. And we'll see you on the next one, apparently with refugees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.